Yeah, I mean, there was that FBI document that was released in the Epstein files that said that Trump is compromised by Israel and Jared Kushner is the real brains behind his presidency. I mean, this is just what was released in that FBI doc. Who knows how true it is, but it
Yeah.
seems to fit. And if that's the case, it's the only explanation that I have for why this might happen. Because I just
Yeah.
every night before going to bed, when I wake up, I'm like, this is surely we won't do this. They understand, right?
Yeah.
The possibility of an aircraft carrier getting sunk. I mean, even if it doesn't get sunk, just if it gets hit, then that thing's out of commission for
Mhm.
years. Just being it's so dangerous, and all these bases out there in the Middle East in this hostile territory. It just it doesn't make sense. And
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And that report may very well be true, that he may be compromised. They may have compromat on him, and they're using that to push him into this war. That's certainly possible. I don't deny it, but I think it's still believable that he would do it without that. I mean, there's all kinds of pressure on him aside from that.
But that pressure
It's,
is the same thing. In a sense, it's compromised. Like I've been thinking about this. Like, how is it seems too fantastical that a foreign country could have so much influence in our own country that's able to just hold so much power within the United States. But then I was just thinking, it's kind of what you were telling me earlier, like, when we talk about the Ukraine war, and I wonder, like, people are getting force conscripted and are upset and want to fight back. And you say, well, it really just matters if you have a small organized group that they can control the majority, even if they're the 1% or whatever. If they're organized and coordinated, then they can. And then I was just thinking about, with Israel, it's like they've been in their mindset, they're in a constant state of war. They're a hyper militarized country. They believe in this, they're in this hostile environment, and they believe in this greater Israel project. And when you're at war, you'll do whatever it takes to try to win. Like, this is our goal. We need to create greater Israel. We need to establish our security, whatever, from just thinking about it from the Israeli point of view. And then,
mm,
well, how do we do that? Well, the military is a hyper organized machine. And then I think about how they controlled the United States and how they got so much power in the United States. It's almost like a military operation. They're understanding it like, okay, they got the board. We need to hold all these positions of power, because the only way that we can create greater Israel and create our security and our Jewish state, our homeland, is through the United States. So it is a military mission for us to try to occupy all these positions within the United States, to have this dual loyalty, but the ultimate loyalty is obviously to the Zionist project. And that's what they've done over so many years. And then it just kind of makes sense. It's like, and most of us are oblivious because we don't even think about it. Like, there's a military operation, that some other country is thinking about how do they control our halls of power, use money to influence for their own personal. I mean, a lot of time I
yeah.
think people think about it as just like, how do they personally enrich themselves? But I think it makes a lot more sense when we think of, when we think about lobby groups. It's like, how did could that corporation get wealthier and write out its own carve outs for itself? But here it's like, no, this is military. This is like existential for them. Do you think that's the right way to look
Yeah.
at it?
Yeah. Well, obviously this is, these people are passionately attached to the concept of greater Israel. And, they understand again the, that greater Israel, is not possible without U.S. support. It's just that simple as something. So for decades, if it wasn't for U.S. support, that really became pretty much unconditional, or, not entirely. It's actually become sort of more unconditional over time, but really solidified during, under Johnson, especially. I think I always point to the turning point of the USS Liberty. I think that's a good, if you want to, point to the beginning of kind of Zionist domination of U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East. That's the incident that you should point to. Um, so yeah, they have that understanding, they have that passionate attachment, they have the resources, and they are helped also by, let's say, by organic, in domestic support, from the Christian Zionists. That's part of it too. That helps them. I don't think it's the main or really the driving factor, but that helps them. And so they have achieved this outsized influence.
How organic do you
It's
think
just,
that is? The Christians
I
are.
think actually, see, I used to assume that it was totally it was pretty much a creation of the Jewish Zionists. But after reading a very detailed history of Christian Zionism, I changed my mind. It actually is something that began even, pretty much began at the same time that Jewish Zionism began, under Theodor Herzl, which was secular in its initial foreign incarnation. It began pretty much, but yeah, maybe even a little earlier. I think you can say it began a couple of years earlier, and it's something that did develop really on its own terms, and went along parallel tracks. I think now that increasingly it is sort of driven and shaped by, let's say, Israeli or Jewish Zionism, but it does have its own roots. I think that's clear. That's something, and it's something that is, again, strengthened the Zionist cause within this country. So anyway,
It's hard for me to believe that it just has its own roots, that there wasn't something, you know what I mean? It's just such a weird thing that would just
yeah,
pop up. And why would it just
right.
pop up around the same time? Jewish Zionism
Yeah,
pops up?
but again, it actually preceded, antedated, and you can't really find any connection between um, the Christian Zionists and Theodor Herzl and his movement. Again, Theodor Herzl was very secular, and they were actually, I remember reading stories of some of the Christian Zionists approaching like synagogues and telling them, yeah, we support this, you return to Israel, and the response that they usually got is that you're nuts, we're not doing that. That's not part of what we believe or whatever. This was, it was their own thinking. It is. Look, there are all kinds of. In the 19th century, there are all kinds of really, what I consider to be very strange, we call them heretical movements, real corruptions of traditional Christianity, were born during that century. And one of them was Christian Zionism.
What were some of the others? Or you don't
Well,
want
I would say,
to,
yeah,
we don't want to criticize people. I think I know what you're talking about.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
We're a geopolitical show. I don't want to go, offend anybody. But anyway, let's just leave it at that.
Okay. What were we just talking about before we went off this tangent?
Yeah, well, you were just saying that say this is sort of like a militarized, you have to have, for a movement to be successful, it needs to be organized and it has to have elite connections. It's, people make the mistake of thinking, well, we see an opinion poll, 80% of the people think this way. That's the way we're going to go. Not necessarily. If there is 2% that's very, very well organized, has the money, has the resources, has developed all the connections with the elite, has people among the elite, they can have their way. That 2% can rather than the 80%. And that's actually just well known within political science. That's how things work. And you'd have to say that the Zionists have understood that and had great success with that over the decades.
Yeah, I think what they underestimated is just the unwillingness of the U.S. to go along with it. In the light of this genocide and now this impending war with Iran, people are starting to question and look deeper, and they are recognizing the source of where this is coming from, and they are maybe coming to, kind of an conclusion that I just came to. Is like, wait, maybe this is an intentional kind of military occupation of the halls of power, in a sense, maybe not necessarily militaristic or whatever, but people are seeing it in that sense that there is something wrong here. There's a very unhealthy relationship, and there's so many different avenues that you could have gotten down there. Just if you're on social media, you start to see things and start to question things, like whether it's the Charlie Kirk or Epstein or this conflict with Iran or Gaza. There's enough. Everybody, unless you're living under a rock or you just sit and watch Fox News all day, everybody has something that this image of Israel is severely tainted here in the United States now, at least for people under the age of 50, I think.
Yeah. Well, again, no, it's certainly true. And we've talked about that a lot. There has been a real sea change, a really dramatic shift in opinion. And that's ringing the alarm bells in Israel. And it may be part of, I don't know, which is part of what is pushing Netanyahu and his government to take this, reckless step of attacking Iran. Because again, they want the U.S. to lead the way, but but they know that they are a very likely target if that happens, and they can really suffer damage. But they maybe see that there's a window of opportunity that is closing. It's not okay. First of all, there's a military window. Just the hard power of Iran is going to increase significantly over the next few years in terms of both their missile capabilities. They will, again, according to Theodore Postal, sometime, I think he actually said 5 years, but I think that's really kind of like I would say the outer limit. With especially Russian help, they could do it quicker. They'll have the capability to just wipe out Tel Aviv just with conventional weapons, really just take out Tel Aviv. And they will have eventually a very solid air defense system, the kind that we see being used to great effect in Russia. Again, there was that attack with the 94 drones against Putin's Valdai residence. Not one of them made it there. And that's not unusual. I mean, the Russians have very, very good air defense. Occasionally something gets through, and we always hear about it. But that's, 1 out of 100 or depending on what you're talking about, drones, or 1 out of 20 or something. It's a small fraction that gets through. They have excellent air defense. And if Iran has air defense like that, then it's just over for Israel and the U.S. Now, they say their military planners may understand that this is very risky. This is not going to be easy. That's why they're talking about a weeks-long war. But maybe enough of them believe that it can be done, and if it's done now. But a year from now, 2 years from now, it's just not going to be possible. So they're looking at that. There's the hard military aspect of it, but then there's also, there's upcoming midterms, and there's a chance that we'll see a significant change in the makeup of the Congress. That now we have just a few outliers that dare to be critical in a meaningful way of Israel and its actions. That might increase significantly. Trump will lose, his majority, the Republican majority in Congress, and his freedom of action just may be greatly reduced. They feel like with Trump, this is some guy that we've talked about how he's reluctant to go into war, but at the same time, he's a Zionist, and they feel like they can push him into a war. We'll see. Hopefully they're wrong in that assessment, but it looks like they believe they can do it, and this is their time to do it.
Yeah. Something that just really just kind of pissed me off a bit is when I heard that Israel asked Iran, said like, look, this is the U.S. attacking you, so you don't touch us, right? It's just like, man, you get us to do this war. You just want to stay out of it completely. It was the same thing after 9/11 as well. It's just like they just, they don't want to get their hands dirty. Thank goodness Iran said, no, we know who's behind this. We're coming after you if the U.S. attacks as well. Right. It's just, the whole thing is just so insane for Israel. This idea of creating greater Israel and all this, it's like, there's not enough Jews in the world to occupy greater Israel, even if you did somehow were able to achieve all that landmass. It's like, you guys, Israel could have, if they just, they didn't, do this genocide and just go insane the past couple of years, they could have gone away with it. They had the greatest thing. Their propaganda was effective. They had all the halls of power. They just had all this money flowing in here. They got universal health care, free education. You had your paradise. You did it. You pulled it off. Congrats. Whatever. You fooled all of us. And now look what they've done. They've just gone forward. And now everybody is just so pissed. Everyone's so pissed here around the world. And for very good reason. It's just like, you guys messed up. You could have gotten away with this. Maybe if you kept the same strategy, just build a couple settlements, just kill a couple people a month or whatever it is, like the way that you've been doing it. Still horrible, but it's enough that it doesn't raise this international outcry. Right. We're not seeing babies getting blown up in 4K on our phones. And, I just can't believe, what they've done. And just the hubris, that like you guys had it made and it's too greedy.
Yeah, no, they overplayed their hand. I think that's no question about it. I mean, it's just two completely different worlds, pre-October 7th and post-October 7th, as far as Zionism goes. I mean, that's right. More importantly, the perception of Zionism.
It's just that confidence that they had, that they were, because it's like that, video that we saw of Netanyahu just saying like, the U.S., it's easy to bend to your will, like it's crazy how much, they worship
Mhm.
us basically. And there's that they just felt like that. That was an immutable fact that the
Right.
United States will always back them, that we will worship the ground they walk on no matter what. As America's, they worship the Jews, they worship Israel, like that's kind of what they felt. And now they're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think they still have a lot of that hubris, but there is, um, but at the same time, there is a growing sense of alarm or anxiety. You can. I think they're still confident they'll be able to, like Netanyahu, he's the Houdini artist. He always seems to get out of difficult situations. There are many times the end of his career has been predicted, and he always manages to survive and then you could say the same thing of Israel. I think that they have that same sense. Yeah, we'll get out of this somehow, but they do understand that there are new challenges, and that's why Netanyahu talked about the Eighth Front. He realized he really needed to allocate more resources to fighting that information war within the U.S. because they had suffered some real losses, even as they made some so-called gains in places like Lebanon and Syria.